Hello and welcome to another episode of Thick Slices and Deep Cuts. Tonight's show is another 3-pack. I'm not sure if you call these bands, they're not quite thrash metal, but they're kind of thrash metal. They're not quite power metal, but they're kind of power metal. But we're talking about Metal Church, we're talking about Annihilator, and we're talking about Sanctuary. The reason I pulled these bands together is, one, I haven't done a show on them, and two, Metal Church hails from the Seattle area. Annihilator, at least when I knew them, they were in the Vancouver area at that time, which is not too far away, and then Sanctuary also from the Seattle area. So I just thought, from a geographical perspective, we'll just group these bands together, much like I did with the 3-pack of the New York City thrash and the Bay Area thrash and those things. So, but these are bands that I think everybody knows them. They don't get as much notoriety maybe as some of the other speed or thrash bands from the time, but certainly some good stuff here. I guess we'll just get right into it. As you can hear, we've got Metal Church, the song from the debut album by Metal Church. And I've got just basically, if I can find the cover, there it is. Well, you'll see all the covers. But there's the debut album, 1984. So this is early in the game. Again, it's our Metal Church thrash. They're close. They're kind of thrashy. I mean, they certainly thrash at times. They've got like an American power metal sound going on. Something like Sabotage, but maybe closer to Metallica, somewhere in there. Anyway, debut album comes out in '84. This is Kurt Vanderhoof's band in the beginning. You've got David Wayne on vocals here. I forget the other guys in the band. Craig Wells on the other guitar, Duke Erickson on bass, Kurt Arrington on drums. Songs are really well recorded. In fact, when I was a kid, I had it on cassette, and the first side, the entire first side of this is perfect. You've got Beyond the Black, Into Metal Church, and then this awesome instrumental called Merciless Onslaught, and then Gods of Wrath finishes it out. You flip it over, and you just go back into Hitman and all those songs. But the first album is great, and the production is really good too. And I believe this is Terry Date's first appearance as an engineer on anything. It goes back to '84 with the first Metal Church album. And his production on here is great. The way the drums sound, the guitars sound good, the bass is in there. So the mix is great. Everything is captured really well. Terry Date is one of my all-time favorite engineers. I mean, obviously the stuff he did with Pantera got him huge, but even my favorite two Overkill albums he did. He did a couple other albums we'll be talking about throughout the show as well, but he worked with Soundgarden, and he was based in the Seattle area for a while. So he was kind of in that grunge thrash thing. So he did like the Mother Love Bone album right in the middle of doing Pantera and all of that stuff. So Terry Date's got a very interesting career. But anyway, so the debut album is great. I don't know where to rank it. I think it's my number 2, but it's my favorite David Wayne album. Then you go 2 years ahead to The Dark, 1986, and you've still got Terry Date on the engineering, but he's co-engineering with Mark Dodson, who's now producing. And the production sounds a little bit different. I can tell it's not. I think the production at the time, I'm sure the band was happy with the production, but it's definitely like an 80s production. The snare kind of drives me nuts. But I think that was just the sound of the day. So the production's a little bit not my favorite. And I think it's my third favorite of the first three. I think just some of the songs just don't stick with me. I think Watch the Children Pray, that might have been the first song I ever heard from them. Because they had a video. Start the Fire's alright. Method to Your Madness is pretty cool. The Dark, the song, but there are a lot of tracks on here they're just kind of forgettable. They don't really do too much, so I think that's why I'm going to put it third out of the first three. But it's not bad. It's just not as classic as that first album. But so they're on Elektra Records, by the way, during this stretch, and I think I heard that basically Metallica was pushing for them to get signed to Elektra as well, same label. And Metal Church definitely have a bit of a Metallica sound to them. So their first album in '84, very early to the heavy game, one of the classic albums pre-'86. I think I've said this before. By '86, you had Slayer's Reign in Blood, Metallica's Master of Puppets. You had even Creator's Pleasure to Kill. You had like monumental masterpieces in heavy music by '86, but in '84, this was way ahead of the game. So, and then '86, you get the Dark. Then David Wayne, I'm not sure what happened, but he's out of the band. And they go 3 years between albums, but in '89, they have a new singer, Mike Howe, who's great. And they have Kurt Vanderhoof leaves the band, but is still involved. So you see his name in the songwriting credits all over the place. But I guess he wanted to help the band, but just didn't want to do the touring. So they bring in John Marshall on the other guitar. He's most notably known as the guy that filled in for James Hetfield in the early '90s when Hetfield had a pyrotechnic accident. He could only sing for a few shows. But anyway, so here we go. Blessing in Disguise, 1989. A total classic Terry Day production. I still have the cassette. Man, I listen to this a ton. This is, to me, just a classic album. It's my favorite Metal Church album. You can hear Mike Howe. He's great. He's a great singer, and he's still got that kind of that gruffness that David Wayne always had. But man, I think Mike Howe, the band just seems like creatively they just stepped up to their most creative level in this album. It's like, dare I say, somewhat progressive. I think you got 9 songs. It's like 55 minutes, and you know, Anthem to the Estranged is almost 10 minutes long, and Badlands is a cool song with acoustics and all kinds of like dynamics. This is Rest in Pieces. This is about the Titanic. This is a great song. Fake Healer's great. Just everything on here. The Spell Can't Be Broken. It's a Secret, so they throw an instrumental on there. Of Unsound Mind. So this is just a great album, produced by Terry Day. Comes out in '89, right in the heart of thrash, on Elektra Records. You know, there are some people that love the David Wayne era. I do too. I mean, like I said, that first album is classic, but man, this album, Blessing in Disguise, when I want to listen to Metal Church, it's pretty much this entire album and just about all of the first album. That would pretty much be, if I had an 80-minute CD, I'd try to cram as much of this and the first one on there as I could. Yeah, so Blessing in Disguise, one of my favorite albums of my entire life. I think I was like 14 when it came out or something like that, and I don't think there's been much of a stretch of time in my life since it came out where I haven't at least listened to it, you know, once a year or once every couple of years. Just for me, for my personal musical taste, this Blessing in Disguise album is great. And then they come back in '91. I guess it's the same lineup as Blessing in Disguise. You're back to Mark Dodson as a producer, and you're dropped from Elektra, but now you're on Epic, so you're still on a good label here, and you put out The Human Factor. And this is '91, and I've said this many times, but these thrash, these types of bands, I think '92 was the line. You were still kind of viable up through '91. I think in '92, once Nirvana hit and Pearl Jam hit and all that stuff hit, things just completely changed. But this has a bit of a fresh sound for the time. You know, they've got like feedback at the beginning of the album, and you know, it's a little more stripped down, a little more raw. The bass is up in the mix. They seem a little more loose, a little bluesier at times. I don't know what to say about this album. I don't think it's bad, but I don't reach for it that much. The Human Factor is kind of catchy. Date with Poverty, I don't know. I think they had a video for that. It just doesn't, not my favorite song. The Final Word, it's okay. They're definitely going for the catchiness here, but it doesn't, yeah, In Harm's Way, you know, Free From Reality is pretty heavy. They thrash a little on here, and it's definitely got a more modern tone to it, so they're definitely trying to change with the times, even though the times are about to change big time right around here. But they're trying to get a fresh sound with this album. And this is pretty much as far as I went, because this is '91, and '91 was the year that, for me, that like just the extreme music just took over. You know, and by '92, I think, you know, Dream Theater had that album. So by '92, I'm already off into like progressive death metal, all that stuff, and just bands like Metal Church just kind of fell through the cracks for the longest time. But not to fear, I came back to them years later. But so this was pretty much as far as I went with the band, and I would probably rank this, I guess, 4th. I think The Dark is a little bit more classic than this one. And then I know, oh yeah, I've got Blessing in Disguise on CD, have it on cassette, and then I got the Elektra years '84 to '89. It's on here, so I've got it all over the house. Then they did in '93, again, same lineup as Blessing in Disguise and The Human Factor. They do Hanging in the Balance on another label. And I think people really enjoy that album. I listened to it a couple of times for this show, and it's not doing anything for me, but I also, in fairness, did not grow up listening to it, and I don't really have a connection to it. But I saw that Jerry Cantrell has a guest spot on the album, which makes sense. The band is from Seattle, and Joan Jett is on there, of all people. So it's got some cool guest appearances, and Paul O'Neill produced. So Paul O'Neill did all the Sabotage stuff and the Trans-Siberian Orchestra stuff, I guess would be what he's known for, but he produced it. So I think the fan base likes that. That would be their 5th album. I don't own it, so I don't know where to rank it, but I definitely was into the first 3, and the Human Factor was okay. So, but this is just a classic for me, and the other classic, in my opinion, is that very first album with that cool guitar right there. So there you go. So I guess that's going to do it for Metal Church. Again, this is a perfect band for the 3-pack because, I liked them, but only for a certain phase of their career. Basically, the early years. The Elektra years were like the classic years. Then they went to Epic. It's okay. And then they did one more album with the classic lineup. And then they took a hiatus for a long time, and then they came back. I think, David Wayne did come back, and they had basically a classic lineup for one album that I've never heard. And then he left. They had tons of lineup changes. They had a different singer for years. He left, and then they came back with My Cow. And so he was able to get on one final album. Unfortunately, I'm not going to go into it, but David Wayne's no longer with us, and neither is My Cow. So that's a bummer because when I think of Metal Church, I just think one of those two guys needs to be singing. So, so there you go. That is covering Metal Church, and. So, as I always do on these 3-packs, we will be right back. And we're back. Next band on the list tonight is going to be Annihilator. So Annihilator, I think they're from like Ottawa, but then they were in Vancouver during the early years, and now I think Jeff Waters, he's the mastermind behind the band. I think he's in the United Kingdom now. So, but for purposes of this show, I'm just going to assume they were from also the Pacific Northwest. But I think of all of these bands here that I'm talking about tonight, this is the one band that I still listen to quite a bit to this day. Just because I think Jeff Waters is just one of the most underrated guitar players. He's an excellent riff writer, as you can hear on the song Alice in Hell from Alice in Hell. This is basically a Jeff Waters album. You've got Randy Rampage on vocals. I guess Ray Hartman was the drummer, but I think even though there's a full band photo, Jeff played all the guitars and bass and all that stuff. I think he wrote the entire album. Also on CD. And the reason I have it, again, it's all subjective, but to me, this album is like just absolute classic. Every song on here. The Crystal Ann to open it is a really cool acoustic thing, and then it goes into this song, Alice in Hell, which is hard to beat. Welcome to Your Death, Wicked Mystic, burns like a buzzsaw blade, word salad, Schizos Are Never Alone, parts 1 and 2, Lygia, Human Insecticide. I mean, perfect album. All good songs. Awesome guitar playing. 1989, Roadrunner Records here. I don't know if anybody famous was on the production for this, but yeah, I don't think they had anybody of note doing the production here, but it sounds great. Yeah, just awesome riffs. Jeff Waters, and the next year they lose Randy Rampage, but they get another singer named Kobaru Farr, and they release Never Neverland. So 2 from the Vault, Roadrunner. So the next year they release Never Neverland, which is, I think, as good as the first album. They basically came out of the gate with 2 awesome albums. Welcome to the Fun Palace, Road to Ruin, 6s and 7s, Stone Wall, Never Neverland the song, Imperiled Eyes. the jokey craft dinner, Phantasmagoria, and Reduced to Ash. Oh, and I Am in Command. So, the first two Annihilator albums are just like must-own. Absolute must-own albums. Alice in Hell and Never Neverland. I don't even know how to rank them. 1 and 1A. Again, it's much like with Metal Church. It's just like that first album with the first album and the first one with Mike Howe. That's pretty much what I listen to. With Annihilator, I just keep reaching for the first two albums they ever did. I know I've listened to plenty of their other material, but I'm always in the mood for those first two albums. All of their classic material was right there in the beginning, 89 and 90. Then a few years go by, tons of lineup changes. I don't even know who the singer was, but they set the world on fire. I don't know if you can see that. So this is on another label. What is this, Epic? Okay, so much like Metal Church was on Epic there. So this is 93. They're on Epic Records, but time has gone by. They set the world on fire. And they're trying to go more mainstream, more musically friendly, so it's not nearly as thrashy. And it's 93, so they're trying to stay with the times, and thrash is kind of out at this point. And I don't think it's as bad as other people think. I think a lot of people think this is a terrible album. I just think stylistically it's a little weird. It's definitely lighter. But the title track's all right. No Zone's good. Brain Dance is excellent. It's got a few songs on here. And the other thing is, there's a young Mike Mangini, pre-Dream Theater. He's on drums on this, which blew me away. I had no idea. And, you still got Jeff Waters, so it's going to be of quality, but I guess this would be I don't even know if it's my third favorite album. And I would buy it on CD, but I think it's hard to find. They didn't make too many copies, and it's really expensive, so I guess I'll just stick with my cassette. But that was pretty much when I followed Annihilate, when I was a kid. It was Alice in Hell and Never Neverland, and this a little bit, but I really didn't listen to this a lot back in the day. I've listened to it a lot more here in, more recent times. But here we go, The Fun Palace. Of course I picked songs from the first two albums. Of course I did. And then I guess after this album, they got dropped from Epic. They're on some indie label, and now Jeff Waters is basically singing. So I don't know who the drummer was, but he's basically, the band is completely broken up, and so Jeff's just kind of running the show, and he's also doing the vocals. And the only problem with Jeff Waters doing the vocals is he doesn't have a distinguishable voice. He just sounds like anybody. Like, I've said this before, I'd rather have a distinguishable voice than be a great singer. Like, Randy Rampage is not the world's best singer, but he sounds good on that album. Coburn Farr is not the world's greatest singer, but he sounds good on that album. Jeff Waters just sounds kind of generic on the vocals, and so he's not adding anything to the songs. But they did King of the Kill, Refresh the Demon, Criteria for a Black Widow was the one where they did bring Randy Rampage back, and they tried to recapture those early albums. So obviously the Alice in Hell album, but they also do, I forget what it's called, Return to the Palace. It's basically the Fun Palace Part 2. They're borrowing a lot of the melodies from that. So it was kind of cool. I think the song Bloodbath's pretty good, and it was heavy. It was heavier, but that lineup only lasted for that album. And then, at that point, I think you're into the 2000s, and he's in this groove metal phase. I think he still has it, but at the time he shaved it, he had like a little mohawk. Got a different singer. They're doing like Carnival Diablos and Waking the Fury, which are okay. They're kind of more groove metal, I guess. Pantera-ish. They're okay, and they're just trying to change with the times, but it's still just not that classic early Annihilator. But then they get David Padden as their vocalist, and they do some pretty cheesy nu metal albums, but he's got a good voice. And I think their self-titled album in 2010 is the one where I kind of noticed, like, wow, this band's back. It was really thrashy, technical, tight, and Padden sounds good. I'm pretty sure he's using auto-tune all over his voice, but it still sounds good in spite of that. And then the one I did buy is Feast from 2013. I got the special edition. Why did I get the special edition? And the Walking Dead was big at this point. But man, it's a good, heavy. It's the last one with David Padden. It's got Deadlock, Smear Campaign, Demon Code Fight the World, 1 Falls, 2 Rise. But what it has is it has a bonus disc called Re-Kill, where they re-record Fun Palace, Alice in Hell, King of the Kill, Never Neverland, Set the World on Fire, Welcome to Your Death, No Zone, Bloodbath, Stonewall, Ultra Motion, Time Bomb is a good one, Refresh the Demon Word Salad, and Brain Dance. So that's really cool. So not only is it one of their better studio efforts, much like the self-titled from 2010, which I should probably get, but it's got that bonus, the bonus disc with all that really good re-recordings. And the cool thing about the re-recordings is I like those and the originals. So it's just nice to have a good quality song in 2 versions. But Feast is really cool. It's probably the thing I reach for a lot too, but obviously those first 2 albums, Alice in Hell, Never Neverland, they can't be beat. But there you go. So I guess that is going to cover Annihilator. I just wanted to touch base on them. Again, very underrated band. I think people know of them, and I think people may know who Jeff Waters is, but I just think they never got their due. And the other problem was they kept getting dropped by labels and all those lineup changes with different singers. I mean, I think they had 4 albums, 4 different singers. You know, so that's just, it's tough to get a solid following when you're playing speed thrash into the 90s and you keep changing the lineup. But they've released some classic material for sure. So, but that will, I guess that will do it for Annihilator. So we'll be back with one more band. Okay, and we're back. One final band here I mentioned earlier, and that is going to be also from Seattle, also from the Pacific Northwest. We're talking about Sanctuary. Again, one of these 2-for-1s. There's the classic band lineup. Warl Dane, right there with the crazy long hair, and a very distinguishable voice. So I think of all the vocalists we're talking about tonight, you know, Mike Howe's great, but man, Warl Dane in his prime could sing through the stratosphere, especially on the chorus for this song, Battle Angels. Let's see, this song we're listening to is from their debut, Refuge Denied. I guess it came out in '88, was recorded in '87, produced by Dave Mustaine, who also has a guitar solo on one of the songs. So Mustaine, I guess, found them and wanted them signed and wanted to produce this first album, so he did all that. Terry Date producing on this. So there, Terry Date finds his way again. Did all the 80s Metal Church, but he also assisted on the Refuge Denied album. But what to say about Sanctuary? They're heavy. Are they thrash? I don't think so, but they're dark, and they sometimes thrash a bit. So again, it's just one of these, like, is this American power metal? What? Yeah, there's Warl right there. It's like higher than Rob Halford, but I think that's what it's right there. Well, we'll just wait for the chorus. I personally think Warl Dane makes the band. If it's not for his voice, you know, I don't know if I'm listening to these Sanctuary songs. They're not bad though. And I think this is the more classic album, Refuge Denied. But I think Into the Mirror Black is probably, you know, whatever, the more mature album. But who cares if it's mature or not? It's just, do you dig the songs? So past tense to future tense is all right. Taste Revenge, we'll probably hear in a sec. Long Since Dark and Epitaph. So the first side is great. First side is solid. You know, you flip to the other side, Eden Lies Obscured and the title track. So this is good too. I think Warl Dane is a great lyricist. He's a really, he really knows how to tell a story. And of course, you know, we won't get into it just yet, but, you know, I'll mention his next band here in a little bit. But anyway, so they do these 2 albums, 88 and 90, playing this like American power metal, slightly thrashy, dark. And then I guess they get dropped too. You know, they get dropped for lack of sales, whatever the case was. And, you know, the band continues on. Jeff Loomis, a young Jeff Loomis, joined Sanctuary. He's in the band for a couple of years, just doing live stuff, I guess. And then they just decide to end that band. But Jim Shepard, the bass player from these albums, and Jeff Loomis sticks around. And Warl, they form Nevermore, obviously. And Nevermore is much heavier. Much heavier, much more modern sounding. And this is where Warrel Dane, he's not singing through the stratosphere as much anymore, but man, Nevermore is a poem by Edgar Allan Poe, and Warrel Dane is the Edgar Allan Poe of metal. Like his lyrics and his use of words is incredible. I wish I was a better lyricist, but man, I read some of the stuff. I'm not even really into lyrics all that much, but he's one of the best lyricists out there. Well, he's unfortunately no longer with us, but man, what he left behind is solid. I think at some point I'll at least try and do a 3-pack of Nevermore. I really didn't get into them until Loomis started playing a 7-string. So that would have been like Dead Heart and Dead World up to the end. But I definitely need to talk about Nevermore, because when I think of Sanctuary, I just think, oh, well, I just want to go listen to some Nevermore. Like, switch out these guitar players with Jeff Loomis, and switch out the 6 strings with the 7. And let's hear that. But if you want to hear Warrel Dane singing at his highest, listen to the first 2. Also, they finally, Nevermore finally ends. 2011, something like that. And so Warrel Dane was I think he was bummed. I think Jeff Loomis was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to do something else. And so Warrel was like, all right, well, Nevermore is not Nevermore without Loomis. So he went back to Sanctuary, but it sure sounds like Nevermore. So that's kind of cool. And it's 6 strings, but it's down tuned. And so this album, The Year the Sun Died, from 2014, is surprisingly good, surprisingly strong, and very Nevermore-ish. It has more in common with Nevermore than it does these first 2 albums. I think it's almost entirely the same lineup as the first albums. I think they have one different guitar player, but it's Lenny Rutledge, Jim Shepard, Warrel. So this album is good. If you haven't heard it, check it out. I don't think we're going to go long enough, but I did stick a song called Frozen on the end, and that's really good. So there you go. There's Sanctuary. I don't know how much people know about them. I don't really even know how big they were in their time, but I knew who they were back in the day. I thought they were pretty good. They just had that problem like some of these bands have, where it's just like you're not quite thrash, and you're not quite progressive, but you're kind of thrash, and you're kind of prog. So where do you fit? But it was nice that they came back and did one solid album in the modern day that had the Nevermore touch to it. But that's pretty much it. This is the legacy of the band right here. Those first 2 classics, and then this comeback, and then Warrel passed away. But he did he was working on a solo album when he passed away, so he had 2 solo albums, which, from what I've heard, are pretty good. So he left us with 3 Sanctuary albums, I don't know, 7? At least 7 Nevermore albums, and a couple of solo albums. So he left a nice little bit of probably a dozen or so albums. But I just wanted to touch on Sanctuary as well. So there you go. That's the 3-pack. These are a little bit more lesser-known bands than some of the bands, but again, talking about kind of the Pacific Northwest. We're talking Metal Church from Seattle. We're talking Annihilator, once from Vancouver, and then also Sanctuary from the Seattle area. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.